Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here this morning. My name's Matt, and looking forward to this series that we've just started. Looking forward to next week, where Mark and Amy, the perfect couple, are going to be speaking to us. Hopefully, there's a bit of confession and a bit of juicy stuff. Anyway, we can flood back here next week. That'd be great. What I'd like to do this morning is really lay a bit of a foundation, a bit of context for this series. I've said to you many times before that the Bible gives us the very highest view of our human identity. And I would say uniquely so, particularly in the context of the ancient world, but this is actually still the case. It's a very, very high view of identity. It's captured actually in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27, which says this: "So God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." There's nothing really like this. It's the basis for our whole system. Even though it's unique, it's the basis for our whole system of values, our concepts of individuality, the integrity of the individual, concepts of the sacredness of human life. It's all our concepts of human rights are all based on this very, very high view of humanity. Now, I keep saying it's unique because I also think it's something we can easily lose touch with. We can accept the parts of that we like and that we want, but we have a tendency to be a little inconsistent. We want to be treated as sacred, and yet we can be very inconsistent about this. And so this very high view of humanity, and this is really the first point that I want to make today, comes with really high ideals. Now, this is also a point of criticism, actually, about the Christian faith that I've heard from critics of the Christian faith, which again, I find a little inconsistent because again, people love the idea that human beings are sacred and yet not particularly keen to consistently follow the implications of that. So we have this very, very high view of humanity, and as I said, this comes with high ideals. Now, one of the reasons why this is a bit of a problem is because it's very evident to everyone that we have fallen very, very far short, that we are all a very long way from embodying the ideals that we believe are to be upheld. On the one hand, we recognize this is the vision of humanity that God gives us. This is what it means to be human. We have a whole system of values that's based on that aspiration. But we have this problem that every single one of us, as the New Testament says, we have all fallen short of what we should be. And so we experience this distance. Now, this is why Christians sometimes are accused with being hypocritical because of the tension that lies between these two things. Because on the one hand, we advocate very high ideals of what we should be, but then on the other hand, it's not too difficult to see that we are all way, way away from that ideal. Now, the response to this tends to be, well, we should lower the ideals, right? We should lower the ideals. And this is effectively what tends to happen, is that we lower our ideals for what we should be to what we actually are, as a way of abolishing the tension between those two things. Now, I'm going to say that the tension actually is very important. But the problem with this response is that when you abolish that distance, when you lower the ideals of what we should be, you essentially, in effect, eradicate the high view of humanity. We essentially lower our vision of what we actually are as human beings. Because it's not just a belief. It's not just something, that, oh, yes, we believe that we are. It's not just something that you say. It's something that you live towards, and there's a reason why I'm putting it this way, you live towards it. Even though we're very far away from it, as we live towards it, we constantly remind ourselves, this is who we're called to be. This is who we're created to be, and we're moving towards that. Now, the reason that it just holding those high ideals and whilst also being very far from those ideals, the reason why that's actually not hypocrisy, it's only hypocrisy if we think that we already measure up to those ideals. That's by definition what hypocrisy is claiming to be something that you're not. The most important thing is that we are actually on a journey towards those ideals. It's not about how big or small the gap is, and some of us may be further towards those ideals than others, but we're still all way, because of the multi-generational build-up of tangles and tangles of complexity. Come on, don't we know that this is true, right? We're enormously complex in our layer upon layer of dysfunctionality, not only through the way that we live, but in some sense also, and this is very much acknowledged in psychology, from what even we inherit, right? We are tied in lots of different knots. And I'm not, blaming our forebears for this. I mean like over thousands of years of humanity, right? We've fallen very, very far short. Now, this actually has a wonderfully equalizing effect. It's one of the bases on which it becomes a really terrible thing to judge another person. I mean, Jesus tells us, do not judge each other. Look, first and foremost, because we're not God. Okay, that's the first thing. That's the first reason why we should never judge another person. But the other very practical reason is that we have no basis on which we're not in a position to judge anyone else because we have all fallen very short of that ideal. And the most important thing is not how big the gap is, but our movement towards. We are on a movement towards becoming who we are meant to be. And here's the most important thing. Grace covers the gap. Grace is what we receive from God. This is what He came to us in Jesus Christ to do, to make forgiveness, to pay for our guilt, to make forgiveness possible, so that even though we've fallen way short, there's grace to cover the gap, right? So we're in a grace zone. God knows that we're all imperfect. Now, I'm saying all of this because this morning, and as we move through this series, we're going to touch on some sensitive issues. We're going to touch on issues and matters in which we have all failed, right? I hope that you sense the gap. It's important that we don't get rid of the tension, because the sense of tension between what we are and what we should be energizes our movement forwards. Not, of course, as much as grace energizes us. So the tension and feeling the tension is actually important. There's a tendency for us to want to make it go away, or another tendency, if when we feel the tension between a sense of what we are and a sense of what we should be, just to wallow in a sense of failure, which becomes a kind of paralysis, right? The feeling of the tension between what we should be and what we are is the word for that is shame. Now, whilst we need to feel the distance and even feel our shame, and all the literature, even secular literature on shame says this, you need to feel it, but you should never wallow in it, right? Because wallowing in shame there's a kind of paralysis there where you start to believe that you are worthless, where you identify or you locate your identity not in what God has called you to be, but what you are. And so this is really important, that we that we allow ourselves to recognize, you know what, every single person in this room, every single one of us, if at any point through this series you think, oh man, I'm such a failure. Oh, I've been such a bad parent. I'm such a bad spouse. I'm such a bad friend. I've been so grumpy. That's okay to feel that, right? Like, join the club. This is the club. This is the you. If that's you, in fact, if that's you, you're in the right place, because we are a recovery community. That's what we are. This is not a place for perfect people. No perfect people allowed, right? We are a community of people on a journey, right? Because we recognize that we've fallen short, and it's so important that we allow ourselves to move forwards. Okay, so there's two things that we're going to hold in tension. We're going to allow ourselves to see that we've fallen short without wallowing in shame, because we don't need to. That's the first thing. But at the same time, we're going to uphold very high ideals, okay? Because that honors what God has called us to be. Now, part of what Jesus Christ has done for us is to enable us to walk as sacred children of God. You don't cease to become of value to God just because you fail. Okay, so that's important to recognize. Now, as I said, this concept, this very high view of humanity, is expressed in the Bible in terms of, well, the biblical word is holiness, but the Latin version of that is sacredness. Every now and again, it uses that version. I like the word sacred, and I've been bandying it around for a long time now, haven't I? And the reason I've been using that word is because I think it captures the concept of being holy tends to have just mere moralistic overtones. I like the concept of sacredness. It has the right associations, I think. So, and I've said, this is something I've said a million times to you. I've said so many things a million times, I should just stop, really. I mean, but one of the things I've said again and again, it is of the very nature, if something is sacred, and you know what I'm going to say, don't you? For those of you who have been with us for some time. But for the sake of those who are joining us and who are new today, and I'm so glad you're here because we love having new people joining us on this journey. For the sake of those who are new, if something is sacred, it means by definition you can't just do whatever you want with it. If something is sacred, by definition, if you treat it as a means to something else, if you treat it as an object to be used for your pleasure, if you treat yourself or another person as a means to an end, then it is a very terrible, and I'm going to use this word, desecration of something that God holds to be of the greatest value, right? Now, to love another person, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about love this morning. To love a person by definition is to honor them as sacred. It's really important to give that definition of love because it can mean a whole lot of things, can't it? In fact, love can even mean to love the pleasure that another person gives you. That's a very unfortunate definition of love. Because again, other people should never ever be treated as a means to your pleasure or as even a means to your happiness. I mean, there's a good one. We should never treat another person as a means to your happiness because people are never a means to an end. God loves his children and he calls us to love his children, which means to honor them as sacred. Now, the inner sanctum of our sacredness is, of course, our sexuality. And I want to say today and remind you, and I think deep down we know this, and again here in our culture there's a bit of inconsistency, Sexuality matters, like it really matters. This is why we distinguish. There's a whole level of seriousness to forms of sexual violation as opposed to other forms of, say, physical violence. And there are philosophers that, again, atheistic philosophers who, for consistency's sake, will argue that should not be treated any differently. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, in the 1960s and 70s, advocated for that very view. We shouldn't treat it as any different because it's inconsistent. But actually, we know, and I think many, unfortunately by experience, know that the two are very different. There's a level of seriousness when it comes to our sexuality. Why? Well, I think the biblical worldview really validates this, actually in a really beautiful way. Because our sexuality is the inner sanctum of our sacred selves. Which again means, to repeat myself, that you can't just do whatever you want with it. It's set apart for something. Namely, it is designed to sow into, or it is designed to create, in a very important sense, the sacred bond of marriage according to Scripture. There's a beautiful picture of this in Genesis chapter 2, and I'm not going to read it to you. But the picture there that we have is a picture of the two halves of humanity, the man and the woman becoming created separate and equal, with equal substance and equal integrity. That's what the rib being created from the rib. And I mean, through our cultural lens, you sort of read this and we're a bit, we think it sounds perhaps a little demeaning, but in ancient Near Eastern symbolism, all the terms that are used there are conveying equality, equal dignity, because it wasn't believed everywhere. In fact, it was believed nowhere else in the ancient world that men and women were equal. Again, as I said, the Bible is the foundation of our system of values. And in a wonderful way, the first couple of chapters of the Bible affirms not only the full dignity, the high dignity of human beings, but that it's a shared dignity and it's something that is expressed in beautiful ways. Because remember, we are called to reflect God, and there's a wonderful way in which the marriage relationship, the union of the man and the woman in the relationship, the unity in diversity and the sense of oneness, the two becoming one, is a wonderful picture of God himself, of course, who is diversity in unity and unity in diversity. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture. And it becomes a way of expressing the image of God, but the role of sex, of course, is to establish and create that oneness and that union. Let me also say this too, and I think this is important. This pushes a little against a little bit of a cultural thing. When I was in my 20s, probably the thing that was most urgent, and I'd just become a Christian, but almost with equal urgency to following God's purpose with my life, I had this urgency around, I've got to find a partner. Like, almost as a kind of, I'm not going to be valid, as a form of self-validation. I've got to find someone. And if I don't find someone, then somehow that reflects on me. And it was such a mistake for me as a young man in my early 20s, rushing into relationships. And with this sense of I'm not complete, or I'm not going to, I need a relationship to be valid. It's actually, I think, worth recognizing that marriage, interestingly in the New Testament, isn't the highest expression of an ideal. And I think this might shock you, because I think, again, it's famously in our culture, and there's more and more recognition of our obsession with coupling, right? There's a movie called Lobster, which it's kind of parodies this obsession, this unhealthy obsession with everyone pairing off. And it's a movie called Lobster. And in the movie, single people are sent to a concentration camp. And they have to, and if they don't find a partner, then they're turned into an animal, hence the lobster, right? And it's a bit of an absurd sort of film, but the point of the film is that it's parodying an unhealthy cultural obsession with everyone pairing off, to almost to the point where if you don't couple up, then somehow you're less human. And it's aggravated by the fact that we live in a fairly fragmented society where people, form these kind of nuclear families, and, we've lost a sense of community. And so that even compounds the sense of urgency, this almost panic. Oh, I've got to find someone, otherwise I'm incomplete, otherwise there's something wrong with me, somehow I'm less than human. So over and against that, I just want to underscore that it's interesting to note that in the New Testament, the highest ideal is not marriage, but singleness. And both in the teaching of Jesus, and I'm not going to go massively into this right now, because you look like you're in shock. But I'll just put it out there, because again, right? I mean, we've got to push against these, and I would say damaging cultural assumptions. I mean, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he says, "I wish that you were all single like me." And he doesn't mean aloneness. In fact, he sees his single state as further from aloneness than even marriage. Because his point is that this is why Paul says this. This is why he says, I've chosen to be single because I can devote myself more fully to God, to the mission of God, and to other people. And he puts that forward as a higher state of being than marriage. There you go. Take that, all right? Okay, it's good. We like to smash a few cultural assumptions, because part of what's undergirding that, again, I mean, this is another cultural assumption that life is all about self-gratification. This again has been well recognized to be a problem in our culture, right? That life is all about gratifying what I want. Most famously, of course, in Aldous Huxley's novel, A Brave New World, where it's a dystopian scenario in which people are kept docile by being given everything that they want all the time, the great motto of that society. And Aldous Huxley is making a comment about the trajectory of our society, by the way, written in the 1930s. The kind of motto for that society was no leisure from pleasure. No leisure from pleasure. It's pleasure, self-gratification, self-gratification. Now, here's the problem with that, which should be obvious, I shouldn't even need to say. But the very opposite of you treating yourself and other people as sacred is to understand human beings as pleasure objects. It's a terribly low view of humanity. In effect, it's something that and when I say we, I mean every single person in this room. Remember what I said at the start, don't panic, don't beat yourself up, feel the gap. It's something that every single person in this room does. We treat ourselves and other people as pleasure objects. Now, it's a privilege, of course, of our particular society that that's even possible, isn't it? I mean, we're a very affluent society. But you see, to treat yourself and other people as a pleasure object is a terrible desecration of what is sacred. That's not who you are. That's not who they are. Now, again, this is recognized to be a problem in our society. Particularly, it's interesting to follow increasing discussion around the issue of pornography in our society, which is being recognised as being psychologically damaging at so many different levels, actually even physically damaging, the way that it damages our sexuality at so many levels. But quite apart from that, so recognising all of those issues, and there's a great website actually that that is devoted to a lot of these issues, and it's called Fight the New Drug. But quite apart from all of those issues, and they are substantial issues, right? Because, even they're saying these are all the ways in which this destroys relationships, and we're talking about relationships, right? But one of the biggest problems with it is that it habituates and ingrains a habit within us of treating other people as objects for our pleasure. Like it deeply, because again, our sexuality is the inner sanctum of our sacred selves. It's actually it's a shortcut to our innermost being in a way, really. I mean, this is why in ancient societies, a lot of cults, particularly the occult, tended to use sexuality as a way of gaining access, right, to your innermost self. So, in a very deep sense, the problem is that it habituates us to a way of regarding other people. It affects us at so many levels. Now, again, feel the gap. Feel the gap, right? God stands before us and he says, look, I see the gap. I see where you've fallen short. I see where you're going the wrong way. If you're just willing to turn around, recognize that you can't move forwards on your own, okay, because sometimes we beat ourselves up. Oh, I haven't been able to move beyond this, or I haven't been able to, be the person that I should be. No kidding. Like, of course you can't. Because we're meant to live primarily in a relationship of dependence on God. That's the first and most important relationship. And I hope during this series that comes through with great clarity. That there's, even in the sacred bond of a marriage relationship, it's never just two people. It's the third person that's the most important, and that is God. We are first and foremost devoted to God, and God wants to lead us forwards. We actually have to recognize not only the gap, but our inability to move forwards the way that he wants us to move forwards. So these are the things that draw us down. These are the things that draw us down. But I want to focus on what draws us up. And primarily what draws us up is first of all the love of God for us, right? The love of God, the unconditional love of God, no matter how much you've failed, right? He paid to cover the gap, right? He paid to cover the gap. Please don't wallow in shame. You don't need to. God's hand is outstretched in Jesus Christ to lift you up and help you move forwards. There'll always be a gap. You'll always fall short, okay? When you fall down, he asks you to get back up again. Every single time, unlimited. We got that? Unlimited. Why? Because his love is unlimited. If you think, too many times, surely God won't forgive me now, you're putting a limit on God's love, and that dishonors God. Honor God's love by knowing that his hand is outstretched to you, and he says, okay, feels bad, doesn't it? How about we get up? Let's move forwards. I can help you. Because it's all about relationship. First with God and then with other people. So first of all, the love of God for us. But now I want to talk about love as something that can lift us up together. And this is a way in which we can truly lift one another up from the context of parenthood, from the context of relationships in workplaces. I mean, every form of relationship. God calls us to love, and again, let's distinguish that from loving a person because they're a really great object of pleasure for you. Let's push that aside. That's a distortion of what love is. Very unfortunate distortion of what love is. But to love someone, to treat them as absolutely sacred, and being prepared to make sacrifices for what is sacred, right? First and foremost for God. I mean, Paul was a great example of sacrifice. Actually, in his case, even being willing to sacrifice, particularly as a Jewish person, being in a marriage relationship and having a family. And he saw something even higher than that, right? And he was prepared to sacrifice for his love for other people. But within all relationships, to love someone and which I mean honoring someone as sacred, can have such a powerful effect. I don't think we actually quite often recognize how powerful it is to love someone in this way. I'm not talking about liking people. You might not like that person that is a pain at work or whatever, right? You might not even like your spouse. I mean, maybe, that's, like you might not be, but you're called to love them. We're called to love people, which means honoring them as sacred. Sacredness cuts through their attributes and achievements or failures, and it sheds light. Love is like a torch that sheds light on them and that shows them that despite their failures, they are absolutely sacred. That under all of the failure, that they are absolutely sacred. Love is a torch that cuts through all of the rubbish, isn't it? It's a powerful, powerful thing. And we don't realize how powerful it is, right? Now, when you probably think of power, maybe you think, I'd love to be able to, go in and do signs and wonders, and that'd be the thing that really, that draws people to... No. Actually, the most powerful thing, more powerful than signs and wonders, is love. I was going to say the power of love, but that just reminds me of a whole lot of really bad 1980s songs. It cuts through. Please understand that you have it within you to love people with a divine... This is actually a very central part of the divine image within us, that we have the capacity to love in a way that will transform lives. You have it within you to do the thing that God wants most to do in this world today, to show people how much he loves them, that he paid for them, that he's calling them to himself, to know how sacred they are. You have it within you to be that torchlight in your marriages. As parents, we do this. In your workplaces, with the people even that you don't like, we have an opportunity to do something really powerful. So, who's up for that? All right, let's be up for that, because it'll change. It'll change our lives and it'll change many, many lives. Why don't you stand with me this morning?